They called me anything but mother in that house. In their polished world, the marble, the investors, the names on the facade, I was an uncomfortable footnote, an old face that didn't belong in the publicity photos. My daughter-in-law wore contempt like couture. She moved through the rooms the way her assistants moved through charts, precise, practiced, hungry. To her friends, I was a prop, a living proof she had kept it together, that she'd married into respectability. To me, she was a blade, and she sharpened it every time I entered their airbrushed life. One gala evening, tables bright with crystal and the hum of deals. She did it in slow, delicious cuts. A new investor leaned in, asking how the family had pulled together the brand's turnaround last quarter. She smiled like a polished CEO and said, loud enough to slice the laughter, the turnaround, that was vision mine. This house, this image, it's been curated. We can't be dragged down by relics of the past. She flicked her eyes toward me the way one flicks dust from a sleeve. A ripple of uncomfortable chuckles. A man I'd seen on TV nodded, his eyes avoiding mine, as if the sight of me might lower his share price. Someone muttered about legacy burdens. A young PR woman offered a swift, rehearsed apology to cover their thin humanity. My son sat frozen, fingers white around his wineglass, unwilling to pull the knife out of his wife's hand or speak my name with any warmth. Honestly, she said, smiling with the cruelty of someone who enjoys social execution, we have to keep brand equity. Investors don't pay for sentiment, they pay for image. Imagine a woman like her in our campaign shoots. It would undo our positioning. She laughed. The laugh was a clean thing that left no room for mercy. The maids pretended not to hear. The butler slid by, with the grace of a man trained to look away when someone is humiliated. I tasted the salt of shame in my mouth, and for a second I almost let myself crack to plead, to explain, to beg for a small corner of dignity. Instead, I folded my hands and kept my face steady. There was method in my silence. I had watched men build empires. I had seen power dress itself in suits and wine. But power was also paper and signature and a form filed in the right drawer. They loved to talk about holdings and shareholder confidence. They loved to congratulate themselves on scaling responsibly. They loved the sound of their own authority. They did not know the paperwork that slept in a drawer in my room, quiet, legal, and absolute. They did not know whose name the original deeds bore, or the careful instructions my late husband had left, who had the authority to sign, whose signature could move money, whose consent made the board move. So I smiled, not because I forgave them, but because patience was a weapon they never recognized. I let their contempt build like a furnace. The more they burned me, the hotter their hubris would become, and like all fires fed by arrogance, it would consume them. That night, as laughter still echoed down the hallway and the chandeliers threw light on trophies of imagined success, I carried the weight of a different kind of power in my pocket, something invisible to their eyes and fatal to their certainty. They thought they were polishing a throne. They had no idea whose hand actually held the key. Morning in their mansion was a performance. The smell of imported coffee, the clipped rhythm of staff moving with ear, and her voice, sharp, decisive, the voice of someone who loved being obeyed. My daughter-in-law no longer whispered her disdain. She wielded it in front of servants, in front of my son, in front of anyone who might learn that she, not one, defined who belonged here. You're still here, she sneered one morning as I stepped into the sunlit dining room. I thought perhaps you'd finally realize this isn't a retirement home. We can't host charity cases forever. Her words were precise. Then she looked at me the way a curator looks at a cracked face, with irritation that it dared exist in her gallery. My son kept his eyes on the business pages, the rustle of paper his coward's shield. Do you know what she costs us? She continued, her gaze sweeping the room so the staff would not miss a word. Her medicine, her little comforts, the space she takes. Investors don't want to know that the empire is carrying dead weight. She let those last two words hang, deliberate, like a sentence passed. I smiled faintly, because I had learned that silence unsettled her more than protest. A woman like her needed reaction. She fed on visible hurt. My stillness was sand in her glass of wine, something she couldn't swallow easily. But the cruelty escalated. At dinner parties, she spoke of streamlining the family image. At lunches, she hinted I should return to the countryside, as though I were livestock out of place in a showroom, and in private, her words dripped pure acid. You disgust me, she hissed once, catching me alone in the hallway. Your wrinkles, your smell of age, the way you shuffle like a ghost in a palace you don't deserve. If it weren't for my husband's weakness, I'd have had you removed long ago. One signature, one document and I'd erase you like chalk from slate. Her irony almost made me laugh. One signature, yes, but not the one she imagined. Because every estate she paraded through, every conference hall with banners carrying my son's name, every portfolio she boasted about on television, all of it rested on foundation stones that bore my name. My late husband had been meticulous, perhaps even prophetic, in guarding against betrayal. He had written the company into my hands, the core assets into my guardianship, and the final key into a file they never bothered to notice. But I didn't show my cards. I let her bask in her theater of disdain. I let her sharpen her claws until they bled arrogance, and I let my son drown silently in his shame. Too weak to defend his own mother, too chained to the beauty and poison of his wife. The night the storm broke, it began with her laughter. She was showing investors the new expansion plan, glossy slides, rehearsed brilliance. She leaned into my son, her hand resting on his arm as though he were an accessory to her performance. "All that's missing," she said sweetly, "is a formality. We'll need your signature, darling, just a formality. After all, this company is ours." He hesitated. The room was heavy with expectation. She pressed the pen into his hand. "Sign. It's nothing." But his eyes flicked almost involuntarily toward me, and in that fleeting glance, I saw the moment her empire cracked. Because he knew, somewhere in his memory, in the fine print of inheritance law, in the whispers of his father's will, he knew the truth, that the ultimate authority, the final seal, the true power rested not in his hand, not in hers, but in mine. And when her laughter faltered, when she saw the hesitation, I let my smile curve just slightly, enough for her to feel the cold breath of reality she never expected. The game was about to change. Her laughter had always been effortless, the polished laugh of a woman who thought the world bent to her will. But after that boardroom hesitation, after the flicker of my son's eyes toward me, it changed. It came out brittle, too sharp, a sound rehearsed to cover a fracture. That night, she stormed into my room, uninvited, no longer draped in elegance. Her face was stripped bare, fury painting her cheeks crimson. "What did you do?" she spat, her voice shaking not from weakness, but from the unbearable thought of losing control. "What spell have you cast on him? Why did he look to you as if you matter? You're nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing." Her words poured out like acid. But this time they didn't burn me. They revealed her fear. She was scrambling, clutching at the edges of a cliff she thought she stood atop. "You've lived here like a parasite," she hissed, stepping closer, her shadow cutting across the dim light of my room, "eating our food, sleeping under our roof, poisoning my husband with guilt. But I'll end this. I'll end you, the company, the estate, the power. It will all be mine. I'll make sure you're dragged out of here like the useless relic you are." For a moment, I almost pitied her. Almost, because in her desperation, she had finally revealed what she truly feared. Not me, but the truth hidden in the foundation of her so-called empire. "You think cruelty builds empires?" I asked softly. "You think disrespect writes history?" "No, child. Respect does. Sacrifice does. Loyalty does. Everything you flaunt, every coin you spend, every house you parade is yours. It was not built by your hands. It was built by mine and his." Her lips twisted. Lies? Old women's tales, but her eyes betrayed her. She wasn't sure anymore. The next morning, the staff moved nervously, sensing the storm. My son avoided me, his guilt heavier than ever, and she played her role harder, dressing in diamonds, laughing too loudly at breakfast, snapping at the help as though her cruelty could stitch her cracks closed. But whispers spread. The lawyers she called, the accountants she summoned. Each one came away more cautious than the last. I could feel it. The empire's heartbeat had shifted. One evening, I watched her through the glass doors of the office. She sat alone, papers scattered like broken shields around her, her perfect posture slouched, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to make sense of what she had discovered. "Assets, frozen, mother-in-law's name," she muttered, the words slipping through clenched teeth. She crumpled the documents, tore them apart, as though shredding paper could erase reality. And when she caught my reflection in the glass, she sprang up, her voice cracking. "You can't win. You're weak. You're old. You'll die before you ever enjoy this power." I stepped closer, my voice steady. "Then perhaps I'll leave it to someone who knows its worth. But not you." The color drained from her face. For the first time, she looked at me not with hatred, but with terror. She realized the game she thought she had already won had only just begun, and she was no longer the player, but the pawn, the palace she built on contempt, was trembling, and she knew it. The grand boardroom was filled with murmurs, the air heavy with anticipation. Lawyers, accountants, and board members sat stiff in their chairs. She entered like a queen, draped in diamonds, her heels striking the floor as though every step claimed the empire as hers. But behind that polished smile, her eyes betrayed unease. My son sat at the head of the table, his jaw tense, his hands restless. And I sat quietly in the corner, the frail, unwanted mother-in-law, clad in nothing but a simple shawl, but with my head held high. The lawyer stood, clearing his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, as per the signed documents, all major assets, accounts, and controlling shares legally belong to Madame. And then he turned toward me. The silence that followed was deafening. She shot up from her seat, her face drained of all color. No, that's a lie. Everything is mine. My husband gave me control. I signed the documents. I am the rightful owner. The lawyer slid the papers across the table calmly. Yes, you signed them, but you never read the fine print. The authority you thought was being transferred to you was, in fact, reassigned to his mother. Her scream tore through the room. She clawed at the papers, shredded them, her voice shaking with madness. No, this is impossible. She's worthless, a burden. How can she own everything? I rose slowly, the room watching in silence. My voice was steady, piercing. Worthless, a burden. Those words came easily to you. But respect and loyalty build empires, not arrogance. You mocked me, humiliated me, treated me like dirt. And yet here you stand, realizing the foundation you built your pride upon was never yours. Her knees buckled as she sank into her chair, her jewels clinking like chains. The weight of her downfall was crushing her more than any punishment I could have given. My son's eyes brimmed with tears, shame etched into his face. He knew the truth. It was his silence, his weakness, that gave her room to poison the house. I walked closer, placing the file gently before her trembling hands. All this wealth, all this power, it was never my desire. I claimed it only so you would learn. Power without respect is nothing but ashes. She looked at me, shattered, her voice breaking into a whisper. It's all over. And I gave her the final blow, a smile, calm and unyielding. You once said I was a burden. Today, the world sees who truly carries the weight and who collapses beneath it. The boardroom erupted in applause. The very people she once commanded now turned their backs. And the woman who had declared herself queen was now nothing more than a defeated shadow, broken inside the empire she thought she owned. My silence was the loudest punishment she would ever know.